Scary telling. I am a photographer, and I have always loved capturing the emotions and stories of people through my lens. But there's a dark side to my passion that I can never reveal to anyone. You see, every photo I take of someone tells a story, and every story is a cry for help. It started when I was young. I was always fascinated by the old photos of my grandparents, and I loved hearing the stories behind them. As I grew up, I became more interested in photography, and I realized that I could tell stories through my own photos. At first, it was just innocent portraits and candid shots of people in public places. But then I began to notice something strange in my photos. There was always something in the background that didn't belong there. A shadowy figure, a strange reflection, a blur of movement that shouldn't be there. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just a trick of the light or a glitch in my camera. But as I continued to take photos, the anomalies became more frequent and more pronounced. And then I began to hear whispers, faint voices that seemed to come from my camera itself. The whispers were always the same. "Help me," they would say. "Please, someone, help me." I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew that something was wrong. I started to investigate, studying the photos and trying to find patterns or clues. And then I discovered it. Every photo I took contained a hidden message, a cry for help from the person in the photo. It could be a child with bruises on their arms, a woman with fear in her eyes, or a man with a haunted expression. But they all told the same story. Someone was suffering, and they needed help. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to do something to help these people. So, I began to track down the subjects of my photos, seeking out the people behind the cries for help. Sometimes it was easy, just a matter of finding them on social media or through mutual acquaintances. But other times it was more difficult, requiring me to use my skills as a detective to uncover their identities and locations. And then I would reach out to them, showing them the photo and telling them what I had discovered. Sometimes they were grateful, relieved that someone had noticed their pain and was willing to help. Other times they were angry, accusing me of invading their privacy and meddling in their lives. But I couldn't stop. I knew that I had to keep taking photos, keep listening for the whispers, and keep helping those in need. It was a burden, a curse even, but it was also my calling. And then one day, I took a photo that changed everything. It was a picture of a young girl sitting alone on a bench in the park. She looked sad, lost, and scared. And when I looked at the photo, I saw the same message I always saw. "Help me." I tracked her down, using my detective skills to find her home. And when I arrived, I realized too late that I had made a terrible mistake. The girl's father was a violent, abusive man who didn't take kindly to strangers showing up at his doorstep. He attacked me, beating me senseless and destroying my camera. And as I lay there, battered and broken, I realized that my obsession with helping others had finally caught up with me. But even as I lay there, I could hear the whispers, the cries for help that still echoed in my mind. And I knew that even though I could no longer take their photos or help them in person, I would always hear their voices, always be haunted by their pain. For me, being a photographer was no longer a passion, but a curse. A curse that would follow me to my grave. And as I lay there, struggling to breathe, I realized that the only way to escape the curse was to pass it on. So, I gathered all of my remaining strength and reached out to the girl. I whispered to her, telling her that she wasn't alone, that there was someone who saw her pain and wanted to help. And then I gave her my broken camera, hoping that she would see the same messages that I did and continue my work. As I took my last breath, I felt a sense of relief, knowing that someone else would take up the burden and continue the work that I had started. And as my vision faded to black, I heard one last whisper, the voice of a child crying out for help. I didn't know if I was hallucinating or if it was real, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that someone would hear that cry and do something to help. And I hoped that whoever heard it would be strong enough to carry on where I left off, to be a photographer like me, a photographer of cries for help. I've lived in this house for as long as I can remember, and every Halloween, the neighborhood kids come to my house for candy. They run up to the front door, laughing and shouting trick or treat while I stand in the doorway, smiling and handing out candy. But this year, something feels different. As I'm preparing for the night, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me. I try to ignore it, telling myself it's just my imagination. But as the sun sets and the first group of kids arrive, that feeling only grows stronger. I hand out candy as usual, but something feels off. The kids are all dressed up in their costumes, but they seem quieter than usual. And as they leave, I notice something strange. I don't hear the sound of footsteps or the sound of their laughter as they make their way down the street. I shake my head, telling myself it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But as the night goes on, the feeling only gets worse. Kids keep coming, but they all seem to leave in silence. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. As the night draws to a close, I start to feel relieved. Soon, the last of the trick-or-treaters will leave, and I can finally relax. But as the last group of kids approach my house, I freeze. These kids are different. They're dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and they look like they're from another time. And as they approach me, I notice something strange. Their eyes are completely black, and there's no light in them. They stand in front of me, silently waiting for their candy. I try to smile, but my heart is pounding in my chest. I can't explain it, but I know that something terrible is about to happen. I hand out the candy, and the kids turn to leave. But as they walk away, something catches my eye. There's a dark figure standing in the corner of my yard, watching them. It's too dark to see who or what it is, but I know that it's not human. I start to panic, but I tell myself that it's just my imagination. But as the figure starts to move towards me, I know that I'm in trouble. I run inside and lock the door, but I know that won't be enough. I can hear the figure moving around outside, and I know that it's only a matter of time before it breaks in. I try to think of a way to escape, but I know that there's no way out. And then I hear it. The sound of children's laughter coming from inside my house. But I know that it's not the kids from earlier. It's something else. Something evil. I'm trapped in my own home, with no way out. I can hear the creature moving closer, and I know that I'm about to face my worst nightmare. The house on the corner has always been a place of mystery and fear. But now, as I face the darkness that lurks within, I know that it's something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I always love surprises. The anticipation, the excitement, the feeling of something special awaiting me. But that all changed when my parents blindfolded me and led me down to the basement, warning me not to peek. "Remember, don't peek, it's a surprise," they said, their voices cold and menacing. I could hear the laughter in their voices as they shoved me down the basement steps. I tried to take off the blindfold, but they had tied it too tightly. As I landed at the bottom of the stairs, I felt my body jolt with pain. I was too scared to call out for help, too afraid of what might happen if I did. I heard my parents' footsteps retreating up the stairs, followed by the sound of the door slamming shut. I was left alone in the dark, with nothing but my thoughts and fears to keep me company. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to keep my breathing steady and my mind clear. But as time passed, my thoughts began to wander, and I found myself thinking about the worst possible scenarios. What if my parents had abandoned me down here? What if they were never coming back? As these thoughts raced through my mind, I began to hear strange noises coming from the darkness. At first, they were faint and barely audible, but soon they grew louder and more ominous. I heard scratching and scraping and the sound of something slithering along the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The noises were so loud that they seemed to be coming from inside my own head. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growling, like an animal in pain. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, and I knew it was getting closer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I struggled to keep my breathing under control. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but I was frozen in fear. And then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, staring back at me from the darkness. They were like nothing I had ever seen before, a sickly greenish-yellow color that seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. I tried to back away, to crawl up the stairs and escape, but my body was paralyzed with fear. I could feel the thing getting closer, its hot, fetid breath on my face. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. My parents were there, looking down at me with concern in their eyes. What happened? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You fell down the stairs, my mother said, her voice tight. But I knew that wasn't the truth. I had seen the thing, felt its breath on my face. It was real, and it was waiting for me in the darkness. From that day on, I was never the same. I was haunted by the memory of the thing, and by the knowledge that my parents had betrayed me in the most horrific way imaginable. I never forgot their laughter, their cold, callous disregard for my safety and well-being. And I knew that one day, I would have my revenge. I was once a renowned ballerina, my grace and elegance captivating audiences around the world. But that was before the curse that trapped me in my current state, unable to move or speak, trapped in a music box. I can only watch and listen as people come and go, never realizing the horror that lies within. The music box was once owned by a little girl who would wind it up every night before bed and listen to the sweet melody as she drifted off to sleep. But as she grew older, the music box lost its charm and was eventually placed in storage, forgotten. That's where I came in. I had just finished my final performance when I was approached by a man who promised me eternal life in exchange for my soul. Foolishly, I accepted his offer, thinking that I would be able to continue dancing forever. But as the years passed, I realized the true nature of the curse. I was now trapped in the music box, my body frozen in time, unable to move or speak. The little girl's family eventually sold the music box at an antique shop, where it was purchased by a collector who added it to his extensive collection. I have been trapped in this music box for decades, passed from one owner to the next, each one oblivious to the curse that lies within. As I hear the familiar melody begin to play, I brace myself for the inevitable. The lid of the music box slowly opens, revealing my ballerina figure, poised and ready to dance. I can see the awe and wonder in the eyes of the little girl who now owns the music box as she watches my perfect pirouettes. But as the music begins to fade, I am once again trapped in my cursed existence, unable to speak or move. I can only hope that one day, someone will break the curse and set me free from this living hell. Until then, I am condemned to watch from the confines of my music box as generation after generation passes me by, never knowing the true horror that lies within. I was sitting at my desk, monitoring the security cameras that were set up around our property. My husband had insisted on installing them, saying that it would make us feel safer. At first, I thought it was a good idea. But now, as I sat in front of the monitor, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. I was watching the camera that was pointed towards the backyard when I saw movement. My heart skipped a beat as I saw my husband's face appear on the screen. He was making a silly face, trying to scare me. I laughed, feeling relieved that it was just him. But then, as I continued to watch the screen, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the background, I could see my husband's torso, arms and legs all separated on the ground. They were arranged in a neat line, as if they had been deliberately placed there. I screamed, jumping out of my chair and running to the back door. I burst out into the backyard, but there was no one there. The only thing that greeted me was the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I raced back inside and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the entire property but found no sign of my husband. They questioned me extensively, but I had no answers for them. The only thing I could tell them was what I had seen on the security camera. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. There was still no sign of my husband, and the police investigation seemed to have gone cold. I was left alone, consumed by grief and fear. But then, one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small box wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I hesitated before opening it, but my curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a videotape. It was labeled Play Me. I couldn't resist, and I popped it into the VCR. The video was grainy and poorly lit. At first, I could barely make out what was happening on the screen. But then, I saw a figure come into focus. It was my husband. He was bound and gagged, lying on the ground. In front of him, there was a man with a mask on. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear his voice. He was speaking in a low, menacing tone. The man began to torture my husband, cutting off his limbs one by one. My husband's screams echoed through the room, and I could barely watch. At the end of the video, the man took off his mask. I saw his face, and I gasped in shock. It was my neighbor, a man who had always seemed friendly and harmless. I called the police immediately and told them everything. They arrested my neighbor and searched his house, where they found my husband's body. It was mutilated beyond recognition. I still can't shake off the horror of what happened. Every time I see a security camera or a monitor, I'm reminded of the night that changed my life forever. And I can't help but wonder what else could be lurking behind the screen.